It was supposed to be an ordinary evening in Brooklyn, but for David Thompson, that phone call would change everything. After a year of silence filled with bitter memories and unanswered questions, his estranged son Michael Thompson finally reached out. The last time they spoke, Michael had stormed out of David's modest home, furious that his father refused to fund another investment idea. Now his voice trembled on the line, softer, almost like the little boy who once clung to his father. "During summer thunderstorms, Dad," he said, "Claire and I, we miss you. We want to make things right. Come to dinner tonight. Claire's cooking pot roast the way Mom used to make it." For David, the mention of his late wife Linda struck deep. He pictured her smile, remembered her favorite saying, "Families find their way back, given time." Could it really be true? Could the silence and anger finally be over? David smoothed out his navy suit, the one Linda had bought him years ago for Michael's graduation, and carefully selected a bottle of aged bourbon. His heart was heavy with doubt, yet hopeful for reconciliation. What David didn't know was that this dinner in Montclair, New Jersey, would not be the warm family reunion he longed for. It would unravel into a night of secrets, betrayal, a warning message that would make his blood run cold. David Thompson stood in front of the old oak-framed mirror in his bedroom, same mirror he and Linda had chosen decades ago when they first built their life together. He hardly recognized the man staring back at him. The years had etched lines around his eyes, his once black hair now mostly silver, and his shoulders sloped with the quiet weight of solitude. Yet tonight, he felt a stir of energy he hadn't felt in months, a fragile hope that maybe his family was finding its way back. On the bed lay the navy blue suit, carefully unwrapped from the plastic cover that had protected it for years. Linda had bought it for him when their son Michael graduated high school. She'd insisted, "You need something sharp for moments that matter." That suit had seen him through job interviews, business dinners, anniversaries, and heartbreakingly, Linda's funeral. Slipping into it now felt like stepping into the past. Carrying Linda's spirit with him into an uncertain future, he polished his shoes, though the leather was scuffed with age, and placed a silk tie around his neck. He didn't want to look pitiful or small in front of Michael and Claire. Pride mattered, not arrogance, but the dignity of a father who had built something with his own hands and refused to be erased by time. Before leaving, David opened the small liquor cabinet in the corner of his living room. His fingers brushed across several bottles before settling on a fine Kentucky bourbon, aged 12 years, rich and amber in the light. It wasn't just a drink, it was a peace offering, something to place on the table between father and son as a bridge across the chasm that had divided them for too long. The house felt emptier than usual that evening. On the refrigerator, held up by mismatched magnets, were photos that told his family's story. Michael in his Little League uniform, Linda in her Sunday dress, the three of them smiling on a beach trip years ago. David paused at one photo of their family taken at Michael's wedding. He ran his finger along Linda's face in the picture. She had looked so radiant that day, proud of the man their son was becoming. If only she were here to see this attempt at reconciliation. "Linda," David whispered, "you always said families find their way back. I hope you were right." The Uber arrived promptly at 7. David hesitated at the door for a moment, adjusting his cufflinks, running a hand through his hair. Then he stepped outside, carrying the bottle of bourbon like a symbol of fragile peace. His neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, waved from across the street, her little dog tugging at its leash. David lifted a hand in return, offering a smile that felt lighter than any he'd worn in months. As the car pulled away from the curb, Brooklyn's brownstones blurred into the glow of streetlights. David made small talk with the driver, but his mind was elsewhere. The streets gave way to highways, and soon the city skyline faded into manicured suburbs. The houses grew larger, their lawns trimmed like golf courses, their driveways lined with polished cars. By the time they reached Montclair, New Jersey, David's unease began to creep in. These weren't just nice homes. These were mansions. It's the kind you saw in glossy magazines or television dramas. "Here we are," the driver announced cheerfully, pulling into a circular driveway that wrapped around a stone fountain. 2 luxury cars gleamed in the twilight, parked as if to show off. The mansion loomed ahead, All stone columns and arched windows lit up like a palace. David's heart pounded, clutched the bourbon tighter. How could Michael afford this? Just a year ago, he'd been begging for money, claiming he needed help to invest in real estate. And now, here he was, living like a Wall Street tycoon. The driver helped him with the door, and David stepped onto the pristine pavement. His shoes clicked against stone as he walked toward the massive front door. Motion. Lights flickered on, illuminating his path with theatrical precision. For a moment, David felt small, like an outsider walking into a world that didn't quite belong to him. Still, he straightened his shoulders. He was here for family, for the possibility of forgiveness. He reached for the brass doorbell, but before he could press it, the door opened. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and streaks of gray in her hair stood there, dressed in a crisp black uniform. She introduced herself warmly. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson. My name is Maria, Michael, and Claire are waiting for you." David nodded, stepping into a foyer so grand it took his breath away. Marble floors stretched out beneath his feet, chandeliers sparkled overhead, and artwork lined the walls. He swallowed hard, tightening his grip on the bourbon. Tonight, he told himself, was about more than appearances. Tonight was about second chances. He was ready to believe again. What David didn't know was that the warmth of this reunion hid something darker, a storm of betrayal waiting just beyond the polished surface of Montclair's perfect mansion. David Thompson followed Maria into the mansion's grand foyer, and for a moment he couldn't move. The space stretched upward. 2 full stories, crowned with a crystal chandelier that cast light across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A curved staircase swept upward like something out of a movie, its mahogany banister gleaming in the glow. He had never set foot in a place like this, not even during the most successful years of his restaurant business. "Mr. Thompson, please. Make yourself comfortable," Maria said softly, her voice carrying a strange mix of warmth and worry. Before David could answer, footsteps echoed from deeper in the house. "Dad." Michael appeared, looking like a man pulled straight from a magazine ad. His suit was custom-fitted, his hair styled to perfection, and his smile wide, but there was something strained beneath it, as if it had been rehearsed. He hugged David with a grip that lingered a beat too long. "You look great," he said, his voice almost too eager. Then came Claire, gliding into the foyer in a silk dress that shimmered under the chandelier. Her makeup was flawless, her jewelry understated, but expensive. She kissed David's cheek and clasped his hand between hers. "Jonathan, you look wonderful. We're so glad you came." David managed a polite smile, still adjusting to the sheer opulence around him. He felt suddenly self-conscious in his old navy suit, the one Linda had insisted he keep for important occasions. This house this world made even his best feel ordinary. "This place is incredible," he said honestly, his voice low with awe. Michael's laugh came too quickly, too brightly. "Real estate, Dad? Right place, right time. We got lucky with the market." Something in his tone made David's stomach tighten, but before he could dwell on it, Claire linked her arm through his. "Come, let's get you settled. Dinner's almost ready. I made pot roast your favorite, remember?" How did she know? They'd shared only a handful of meals in 5 years, and Linda's pot roast had never been discussed with Claire. Still, David nodded, touched yet puzzled. "Very thoughtful of you." Maria appeared again, quietly taking David's coat. As she walked away, her eyes flickered with something. Was it concern? A warning? Before she disappeared down the hallway. David frowned, but let it pass. The house unfolded before him like a tour through a lifestyle magazine. The living room glowed with soft lamplight, reflecting off oil paintings. Fresh flowers perfumed the air reel, not silk arrangements like the ones he favored at home. Every detail spoke of money and design. When they reached the dining room, David stopped short. A long mahogany table stretched the length of the space, set for 4. Bone china gleamed under the chandelier. Silver cutlery was arranged with military precision, and crystal glasses sparkled like captured rainbows. "This is beautiful," David whispered. Claire beamed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "We wanted tonight to be special. A new beginning. Michael pulled out a chair for his father at the head of the table, then settled on his right, while Claire gracefully claimed the seat on his left. Their positions felt deliberate, as though they wanted to frame him, guide him, study every expression. David sat carefully, setting the bourbon bottle on the table like an offering. "I brought this," he said. "Thought we could share a drink?" Michael's eyes lit up. "Dad, this is fantastic. You shouldn't have, but I'm glad you did." It whisked the bottle away, pouring generous measures into heavy crystal tumblers. Claire raised her wineglass, her smile radiant, though perhaps a little too perfect. "To family," she said smoothly. "To forgiveness and fresh starts," Michael added, his voice catching just slightly. David lifted his glass, warmth filling, his chest knot just from the bourbon, but from the fragile possibility that maybe Linda's words had been right after all. Families do find their way back. But as he glanced at the chandelier's reflection in his glass, David couldn't shake the unease coiling in his gut. The house was too perfect, the welcome too rehearsed, the sudden wealth of his son too mysterious. For the first time that evening, a quiet voice inside him whispered, "Something isn't right here." The dining room felt like a stage set for plainly this time, David Thompson was the lead actor, and the script was one he didn't quite trust. The mahogany table stretched long and wide, gleaming under the chandelier's glow. Each place setting was arranged with the precision of a military parade. Polished silver, folded linen napkins, and crystal glasses catching light in tiny rainbows. David eased into the head chair Michael pulled out for him, ran his hand across. The table's polished edge, the smooth wood cool under his palm. "This is incredible," he murmured, genuinely awed but also overwhelmed. Michael beamed, his smile a shade too wide. "Only the best for family reunions, right, Dad?" Settled to David's left, adjusting her silk dress with a graceful motion. She leaned close, her perfume drifting like expensive roses, and placed her hand lightly on his arm. "Jonathan, we wanted tonight to be perfect, a fresh start for all of us." David nodded slowly, still absorbing the scene. For a moment, he imagined Linda sitting across the table, humming as she used to while preparing Sunday suppers. How proud she would have been to see her family gathered again, Maria. The housekeeper appeared silently through the swinging kitchen doors. On her tray sat delicate appetizers arranged like artwork. Shrimp perched on cucumber rounds, tiny pastries filled with something rich and fragrant. Her movements were precise, but her eyes told another story. They lingered on David. With a flicker of unease before darting back to the floor, Michael quickly uncorked the bourbon David had brought. "Let's start with a proper toast," he announced, filling crystal tumblers generously. David noticed his son's hands trembled slightly as he poured. Claire raised her wineglass with practiced grace. "To family," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "To forgiveness," Michael added. His gaze locked on his father's, and to Mom. She would have wanted us together like this. The mention of Linda pierced David's chest, lifted his glass, the bourbon catching the chandelier's light like liquid fire. "To family," he echoed softly. The whiskey burned warm down his throat, familiar and comforting. For a moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, he could believe in this reunion. As the meal unfolded, Claire leaned forward with genuine-seeming interest. "Michael tells me you built your restaurants from nothing. 7 locations now, right? That's remarkable." David waved off the praise with modesty. "Empire's too big a word. It was just hard work. Lindashi was the heart of it all. She believed if you treat employees like family and customers like friends, success will follow."
Michael
refilled David's glass before he realized it was empty. "Don't be so modest, Dad. 7 thriving restaurants in New York isn't luck. It's legacy." Warmth spread in David's chest, though he felt it more quickly than expected. Maybe it was the bourbon, maybe the emotions of the evening. Either way, he allowed himself a rare smile. Maria brought in steaming bowls of lobster bisque, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she set David's bowl before him. He caught her eyes for a fleeting second, saw something that looked like warning, but she quickly looked away, Claire spoke again, her tone casual but edged with precision. Do you ever think about retirement, Jonathan? Slowing down? You've built something incredible. Don't you ever wonder what happens next? David chuckled, spooning the bisque. One day at a time. The restaurants keep me busy. They keep me connected to Linda. Michael leaned in, his expression a blend of concern and calculation. But you can't work forever. Have you thought about succession planning? Maybe legal arrangements for the future. The words landed heavier than they should have. David took another sip of bourbon, trying to brush it off. Tonight wasn't the night for business talk. Tonight was supposed to be about family. Then Maria returned with the main course, and the aroma nearly knocked him back in his chair. Pot roast slow-cooked rich, hearty the exact way Linda used to make it. David froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. This is perfect, exactly like my wife's recipe. How did you know? Claire's painted smile deepened. I wanted to make tonight special, to remind you that family takes care of family. The words should have comforted him. Instead, they clung to his mind like a riddle. It's the pot roast. Melted in his mouth? Something else gnawed at him. How did Claire know such precise details about Linda's cooking, about his life, about things he'd never shared with her? David glanced from Michael to Claire, then back to Maria, who busied herself clearing dishes, her face taut with nerves. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet alarm bell began to ring. The warmth of the pot roast lingered on David's tongue, but something colder settled in his chest. For all the familiar flavors in the gracious setting, the atmosphere around the table carried an undertone he couldn't ignore. Claire leaned closer, tilting her head in practiced sympathy. Jonathan, you must feel proud, 7 restaurants, still going strong at your age. But really, don't you think about slowing down? Passing things along? Life is short. Shouldn't you enjoy the years you have left? The question was wrapped in care, but the edge beneath it was sharp. David shifted slightly, his fork pausing mid-air. The restaurants keep me alive, Claire. They're not just businesses, they're memories. Every corner of those kitchens has Linda's fingerprints on it. To give that up too soon would feel like losing her all over again. Michael chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure, Dad, but there comes a point when you need to prepare for the future. You've worked hard all your life. You think it's time to plan for what's next? David raised an eyebrow. You mean plan for after I'm gone? Michael glanced down at his plate, avoiding his father's eyes. Claire's hand found David's briefly, her fingers cool. Against his skin, he only means we care about you. We don't want you burdened. Families are stronger when everything is clear. Her smile was flawless, but David caught the tension in her jaw. The way her eyes flickered toward Michael before returning to him. He lifted his bourbon glass again, noticing how full it seemed, far fuller than he remembered it being a moment ago. You're keeping me well supplied tonight, he said lightly, swirling the amber liquid. Michael grinned. We just want you to enjoy yourself. Relax, Dad. No pressure tonight. But that was the problem. He wasn't relaxed. His head felt heavier than it should have, as though 2 glasses of bourbon had turned into 4. His thoughts, normally sharp as a blade, began to dull at the edges. The conversation blurred slightly, and he had to blink to keep focus. Maria reappeared to clear dishes, her hands trembling enough to make the silverware clatter softly against the tray. She muttered a quiet apology, but David noticed the way her eyes lingered on him, again troubled, almost pleading before she disappeared into the kitchen. He set his glass down. Maybe some water, he suggested, his voice rougher than he intended. Claire was already signaling to Maria. Of course. We should have thought of that sooner. Michael leaned closer, lowering his voice as if to confide. You sure you're feeling all right, Dad? You went a little pale there for a moment? David forced a smile, masking the unease, gnawing it. Him. Just rich food hitting me harder than expected. But inside, alarm bells rang louder. Endless refills. The way Claire and Michael seemed to guide the conversation toward his businesses, his assets, his future. And the strange dizziness that shouldn't have come so soon. He steadied himself by gripping the arm of the chair. Linda's voice whispered, From memory, when something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Excuse me? David said suddenly, pushing back his chair with deliberate slowness. Bathroom asterisk. Michael gestured down the hallway, second door on the left. We'll wait for you. Maria's bringing dessert. David rose carefully, testing his balance. The room swayed slightly, but he managed to walk straight. Behind him, he heard Michael and Claire's voices drop into hushed tones, their words indistinct but urgent. As he stepped into the hallway, the polished paintings and subtle lighting only heightened his disorientation. He glanced back once, catching sight of Maria emerging from the kitchen, her eyes locking with his for the briefest second. That looked the same troubled flicker he'd seen all evening. Something was very wrong. The bourbon, the probing questions, the forced warmth. It all felt less like reconciliation and more like a carefully constructed performance. David's pulse quickened. The whispers behind him continued, blending with the distant clatter of dishes. He moved past the bathroom door, straight toward the faint glow spilling from the kitchen. Asterisk if Linda's instincts lived on in him at all. Now was the moment to trust them. The hallway stretched before David Thompson, its soft lighting and expensive artwork doing little to steady his spinning head. He had passed the bathroom door, ignoring Michael's directions. Something deeper urged him forward, a whisper from Linda's memory. When in doubt, trust your instincts. At the end of the hallway, the faint hum of the kitchen drew him like a beacon. He stepped inside quietly. Maria stood at the sink, washing delicate crystal glasses. Her back was rigid, her hands moving in quick, careful motions. She didn't turn to greet him, didn't even glance his way. It was as if she knew he was there and had chosen to act as though he wasn't. That alone made David pause. Beyond her, a large back door stood slightly ajar, leading to the garden. The cool night air slipped through the gap, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. For a fleeting moment, David thought about stepping outside just to breathe. But before he could move, his phone buzzed. The vibration startled him so much he nearly dropped it. He fumbled in his jacket pocket, pulling it out. On the glowing screen, a text message appeared from an unknown number. Stand up and leave. Now, don't say a word to your son, David's. Blood ran cold. He blinked, certain he had misread it. But no, the message was there, stark and urgent in capital letters. His hands trembled as he reread it. A warning, direct, unmistakable. He looked up, half expecting Michael or Claire to appear in the doorway, demanding to know what he was doing. But the kitchen remained quiet, only the sound of water running and Maria's steady movements at the sink. She still hadn't looked at him. Her shoulders, though tightened slightly as if she knew exactly what message had just flashed across his screen, David's mind raced. Who could have sent it? How did they know where he was?
How did they?
No, he was in danger. He glanced down again. The words seemed to pulse with urgency. Leave. Don't say a word. The dizziness from the bourbon washed over him once more. But this time he forced himself to focus. If the message was right, then every smile from Michael, every careful touch from Claire, and every refill of his glass had been part of something sinister. Slowly, as though in a trance, he moved toward the back door. His footsteps echoed faintly against the tile. And though he expected Maria to stop him, she didn't. She stayed at the sink, her head slightly bowed. Her silence almost deliberate. When David's hand touched the doorknob, she shifted just enough that he caught a glimpse of her face in the reflective glass cabinet above the counter. For the first time, her eyes met his. There it was, the flicker he had noticed all evening. Concern, warning. Permission. David turned the knob and stepped out into the cool night. Motion sensor lights flared on, flooding the manicured lawn in. Pale glow. The garden looked like something from a magazine. Trimmed hedges, stone pathways, and a fountain murmuring softly in the background. But David had no time to admire it. He walked briskly, his shoes slipping slightly on dew-coated grass. Ahead, he spotted a gate at the edge of the property. The faint glow of a streetlight beyond it promised escape. His phone buzzed again in his hand, the vibration almost jarring. Against his palm, another message appeared. Hurry, they don't have much patience. 5 minutes at most. A shiver ran down his spine. He quickened his pace, his breaths coming faster. Each step felt heavier, but determination carried him. Forward at the gate, he pushed it open and stepped onto a quiet residential street lined with mansions. The night was still, almost too still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. David pulled out his phone again, his fingers trembling, and opened his ride-sharing app. He requested a pickup 1 block away, not daring to have the car pull. Directly to Michael's address. 5 minutes. That was all he had to get clear. He stood under the street lamp, bourbon still burning faintly in his chest, and stared back at the looming mansion. Inside, his son and daughter-in-law likely thought he was still in the bathroom, still under their watchful control. Instead, he was standing on the edge of revelation about to learn truths that would shatter what little remained of his family. The headlights of the approaching car cut through the dark, and David knew the night was only just beginning. The Uber's headlights rolled to a stop at the corner, and David Thompson climbed into the back seat, still clutching his phone like a lifeline. His breath came in shallow bursts. He gave the driver his Brooklyn address, but his eyes never left the glowing screen. The unknown number had warned him twice now, once to leave and once to hurry. Whoever was behind it seemed to know exactly what was unfolding inside that mansion. Driver, a young man with earbuds dangling around his neck, glanced in the mirror. "Long night, sir." David managed a tight smile. "Something like that." His voice sounded rough, foreign to his own ears. As the car merged back onto the main road, David's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text, it was a call. The same unrecognized number. His thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, he thought about ignoring it. But curiosity, he overpowered hesitation. He pressed accept. "Hello?" His voice cracked slightly. A calm, measured tone answered. "Mr. Thompson, I hoped you would listen." David's chest tightened. "Who are you? How do you know where I am? That isn't important. What matters is this tonight. You were in immediate danger. Danger." David laughed bitterly, though no humor followed. "I was having dinner with my son." The voice paused, then delivered words that made David's stomach turn. "Your son owes $2.3 million to people who don't ask politely when payments are late. Loan sharks. Dangerous ones." The Uber driver's eyes flicked up at the rearview mirror, probably catching David's stunned expression. "That's impossible," David whispered. "Michael lives in a mansion, drives luxury cars. He all borrowed against his future," the voice interrupted, firm but steady. "Real estate, gambling, poker games in private clubs, sports betting. Through underground networks. He's out of money, out of options, and desperate." David's hand gripped the seatbelt across his chest. Pieces began to fit together in a way that chilled him. Michael's eagerness, Claire's probing questions, the way they both hovered. Over his glass like watchful bartenders, the voice continued. "The bourbon you brought tonight, it laced your glass with a substance called zetralin. It multiplies the effects of alcohol by 5. A couple of glasses and you'd be pliable, suggestible. You'd have signed anything they put in front of you." David felt the blood drain from his face. "Documents," he muttered. "They wanted me to transfer my businesses." "Yes," the caller confirmed. "Power of attorney. Property transfers. Everything you and your wife built together, gone in one night." His chest tightened as he thought of Linda, the woman who had stood beside him when he opened his first diner. The woman who had folded napkins at midnight and worked the register during rushes, would call their employees family, and treated every customer like a neighbor. She was gone now, but her legacy lived in those restaurants. Their own son had planned to steal it. David swallowed hard, his throat dry. "How do you know all this? Who are you?" Another pause. Then, with deliberate care, the voice replied, "Someone inside that house? Someone who couldn't stand by and watch an innocent man destroyed?" David's mind snapped to Maria, the housekeeper. Her trembling hands, her eyes that seemed to plead silently. She had known. She had risked everything to warn him. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Why risk your job, your safety? Because what they planned was wrong. Because family should protect one another, not poison them." You deserve to know the truth. David sat back in the seat, the hum of the tires on asphalt, filling the silence between them. He thought of Michael as a boy, sitting at the kitchen table with a broken toy, tears streaking his cheeks until Linda coaxed him into laughter. That boy was gone, replaced by a man so desperate he'd drug his own father to erase debts he'd racked up chasing greed. The anonymous voice spoke again. Quieter now. You escaped tonight. That's the only reason you still have your life and your legacy. But understand this. Michael will try again. He has less than 2 weeks to come up with the money. Desperation makes people dangerous. David stared out the window as the suburbs of New Jersey blurred into the night. Each well-lit mansion they passed seemed to hide its own secrets. He clenched his fists, his voice breaking as he whispered, mostly to himself, "My own son." The call ended, leaving only the muted jazz from the driver's radio. David leaned his head back, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him heavier than any burden he'd carried before. The truth had been unveiled. It left him more shaken than he ever imagined. The hum of the Uber filled the silence, but David Thompson barely heard it. His mind replayed the words from the anonymous caller, each one cutting deeper than the last. 2.3 million in debt. Loan sharks. Zetralin in his bourbon. Legal papers prepared to steal everything. Asterisk, he pressed. His palm against his forehead as though he could push the truth away, but it clung stubbornly. His son, the boy Linda once rocked to sleep, the young man he had sacrificed for, the man he had believed would one day carry on the family legacy, had plotted to drug and rob him. The driver glanced at him in the mirror. "You okay back there?" Sir David forced out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. "No, not really. But I will be." As the car sped down the dark New Jersey road, David's thoughts drifted back to the dinner table. Michael's overly bright smile, Claire's flawless, rehearsed charm. The way they had hovered like hawks, guiding every word, every drink, every bite. He remembered Michael's hand tightening on his shoulder, Claire's cool fingers brushing his wrist, small touches meant to soothe. But now they burned like proof of manipulation. And then there was Maria. She had known. He was certain of it. Now. Her trembling hands as she poured soup, the nervous glances she couldn't quite hide, her refusal to stop him when he walked through the kitchen toward the back door. Maria had chosen silence in front of her employers. But her eyes had spoken volumes. David realized she was the one who had sent the text. The one who had risked her livelihood, maybe even her safety, to save him. That kind of courage couldn't be faked. And yet, the betrayal of his own flesh and blood cut so deeply that even gratitude couldn't soften it. He remembered Linda's favorite saying, "Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family." Tonight, it had been proven true in the cruelest way. His son had become a stranger, while the housekeeper had shown the loyalty of kin. David shifted in his seat, gripping the bourbon bottle still tucked under his arm. He had chosen it as a peace offering, a bridge back to his son. Instead, it had become the very weapon used against him. That irony stung almost as much as the betrayal itself. 11 days, David whispered to himself, recalling the callers. Warning. That was all the time Michael had before his debts came due. Desperation had already driven him to plan his own father's destruction. What would he do when the loan sharks came calling? The car merged onto the highway, toward Brooklyn. The city skyline shimmered faintly in the distance, a reminder of the world David knew, the honest work, the bustling kitchens. The employees who called him boss with respect, not greed. Those restaurants were his life's work. Linda's dream, the thought of Michael stealing them, of signing it all away in a haze of drugged compliance, made his stomach churn. His phone buzzed again, this time flashing with Michael's name. David's thumb hovered over the answer button, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. What would Michael say? Another lie, another desperate attempt to reel him back. The call went unanswered. Almost immediately another came, and another. 3 missed calls in a row. Finally, a text appeared. "Dad, where are you? We're worried sick." David stared at the words until they blurred. Worried sick. The same. Man who had poured poison into his glass was now pretending concern. The hypocrisy was too much to bear. With one sharp motion, David deleted the message. The driver spoke again, softer this time. "We're about halfway back, sir." "Want me to keep going to Brooklyn?" David hesitated. His instincts screamed for safety, to return to his modest home where Linda's memory lived in every corner. Yet another part of him, the part that had built 7 restaurants from scratch. The part Linda always said was too stubborn for his own good new running, wouldn't end this. Michael would try again, maybe in a different way, maybe with less subtlety. And next time, he might succeed. Betrayal had hit home. But David still had a choice. Let it break him, or let it steal him. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a photo of Linda, her smile frozen in time, her eyes warm and steady. He studied her face, as if waiting for her answer, and in his heart he heard it. "Do what's right, David. Don't let fear decide for you." He closed his eyes, drawing in a slow breath. The pain of betrayal was sharp, but beneath it grew something harder, something steadier. Resolve. The next move would be his. The city lights of Brooklyn shimmered ahead, familiar and comforting. David Thompson could almost feel the worn leather of his favorite armchair waiting for him. The faint scent of Linda's perfume still lingering in the bedroom upstairs. The steady hum of his refrigerator decorated with family photos. Safety was so close, just a few more miles, and he would be home. But as the Uber rolled past the Brooklyn Bridge exit, David's chest tightened. Safety suddenly felt like cowardice. He had spent his whole life teaching his employees to face problems head-on, to never take shortcuts, to protect what mattered most. Could he really run now, knowing his son was desperate enough to try again? Perhaps with more dangerous methods? He reached into his wallet and pulled out Linda's photograph. Her wedding smile, bright and certain, seemed to meet his eyes with that familiar expression she always wore when she wanted him to be braver than he felt. He whispered into the quiet hum of the car, "You wouldn't run, would you, Linda?" The driver glanced back in the mirror. "Everything all right, sir?" David straightened, his decision forming like steel in his chest. "No, not really. I need to make a call." He dialed 911, his hands steady now, despite the weight of betrayal still pressing on him. 2 rings, then a calm, professional voice. Answered, "Emergency services." "What's your emergency?" David drew in a breath. "My family is attempting to poison me for money. I have evidence, and they're still at the location with prepared legal documents." The words felt surreal, as though he were reciting lines from a courtroom drama, but they were true. Terrifyingly true. The dispatcher's questions came rapid-fire: nature of poisoning, number of suspects, weapons present. David answered each one clearly, his business training surfacing like muscle memory. Facts, details, actionable information. "Officers are en route," dispatcher said. "Estimated arrival in 20 minutes? Sir, I strongly advise you not to return until we have secured the scene." David looked again at Linda's photo. Her eyes seemed to challenge him. "Do what's right, even when it hurts." He shook his head. "If I don't go back, they'll destroy the evidence. I'll try again. This has to end tonight." He ended the call and leaned forward. "Change of plans," he told the driver. "We're going back to Montclair." The driver blinked, clearly startled. "Sir, you seem really upset. Are you sure that's a good idea?" David's gaze met the young man's in the mirror. "This isn't a rash decision. Sometimes you have to choose between being safe and doing what's right." The driver hesitated, then nodded and adjusted the GPS. The car swung back toward New Jersey, headlights cutting through the night. The return journey felt entirely different from the first. Earlier, David had arrived at the mansion with cautious hope, burdened by loneliness, but fueled by the dream of reconciliation. Now, he returned with grim resolve. Every passing streetlight illuminated not forgiveness, but betrayal. Not reunion, but confrontation. As they approached Montclair, police cruisers began to appear in the distance, moving quietly with lights off. Their silhouettes against the dark gave David a strange sense of reassurance. "He wasn't going back alone, sir," the driver said softly. "We're almost there. Do you want me to drop you at the house?" David shook his head. Round the corner. I don't want them seeing me arrive before the police are in place. The car slowed, easing into the shadows of a side street. David's pulse hammered in his chest, but his steps were steady as he climbed out. Clutching Linda's photo in one hand and the poisoned bourbon bottle in the other, the mansion loomed ahead. Perfect and pristine, its stone columns glowing under security lights. To anyone passing by, it looked like a picture of success, of family, of the American dream. But David now knew what festered beneath that polished surface: desperation, greed, and betrayal. He paused at the end of the driveway, the weight of his choice pressing down on him. In one evening, he had lost a sunbud. If he did nothing, he risked losing far more: his life, his legacy, and the memory of everything he and Linda had built together. The distant rumble of police engines grew louder. David squared his shoulders, whispering once more to Linda's picture. "We end this tonight." And with that, he walked up the driveway toward the mansion's glowing door, ready to face his son, not as a broken father.
Ow!
The man determined to protect what mattered most. The mansion's front door loomed before David Thompson like the gates to a battlefield. He could hear the faint crunch of tires behind him as the police cruisers positioned themselves out of sight. Their presence gave him courage, but the next few moments would be his alone. He pressed the brass doorbell. Its chime echoed through the vast house like a warning bell. Footsteps approached quickly, too anxious to be casual. The door swung open, and there stood Michael. "Dad." Michael's smile spread wide, but his eyes betrayed him, flashing between relief and suspicion. "Where have you been? We were worried sick." David forced a chuckle, his voice calm, though. His chest pounded. "Just needed some fresh air. Rich food and bourbon hit me harder than I expected." Michael's gaze narrowed. "You were gone almost half an hour." "Beautiful neighborhood," David replied smoothly. "I walked farther than I meant to." "Mind." His son Claire appeared, her silk dress slightly wrinkled as if she had been pacing. Her perfect hostess mask slipped for the briefest second, revealing raw panic before she quickly recovered. She reached for David's arm, her grip too tight to be affectionate. "Jonathan, you scared us? Are you feeling better now?" "Much better," David said evenly. "Let's finish dinner." They guided him back into the dining room, where the once welcoming atmosphere now felt oppressive. The mahogany table had been hastily reorganized. Papers that had been there earlier were gone, hidden away. The crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, but David's eyes caught on the tumbler waiting at his seat. A faint sediment swirled in the bourbon. Proofed hot, he settled back into the chair at the head of the table. Michael on his right, Claire on his left, framing him as before. Maria moved quietly in the background, her shoulders tense, her eyes flickering toward the door as if she knew help was on the way. Michael tapped the table with nervous energy. "So, Dad, feeling completely recovered? No more dizziness?" "Clear as a bell," David replied. His tone was steady, but his eyes studied the glass before him. Claire leaned in, her smile straining at the edges. "Perhaps next time we'll serve something lighter. Rich meals can affect people our age differently." David swirled the bourbon gently, watching the particles dance in the amber liquid. "Oh, I've always had a strong constitution. Takes more than good food and drink to slow me down." Michael suddenly stood, striding to the liquor cabinet. "Let's have one more toast before the evening ends." His hands trembled slightly as he poured fresh measures into 3 glasses. He lingered over David's, tilting the bottle just long enough for more than bourbon to slide in. When Michael returned, he placed the heavy tumbler directly before his father. "To new beginnings," he said, forcing brightness into his voice. David lifted the glass slowly, but did not drink. Instead, he began to speak, his voice soft, reflective. "You know, Michael, I've been thinking about the day you were born. 14 hours of labor. Your mother was exhausted, but when she finally held you, she said she'd never seen anything more beautiful." Claire's hands tightened on his shoulders from behind. "Jonathan, why don't we toast first?" Then, you can tell the story? Patience, David said gently, swirling the glass again. Some stories can't be rushed. Michael's jaw twitched. Dad, just one sip. Please. David met his eyes, steady and unflinching. Your mother always said stubbornness could be a blessing or a curse. I wonder which path you've chosen. The room fell silent. The only sound was Maria in the kitchen, washing dishes with deliberate clinks that seemed louder than usual. Then 3 sharp knocks rattled the front door. Police. Open up. Michael froze, the color draining from his face. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. Claire's grip on David's shoulders faltered. Within seconds, officers swept into the dining room. Their voices were firm, their presence undeniable. Richard Thompson, you're under arrest for attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. Michael stammered, his face pale as paper. No, this is insane. My father's confused. Dad, tell them. David stood slowly, holding his untouched glass. The sediment swirled visibly in the amber liquid. There's no mistake. This glass contains poison. My son poured it himself. The officers exchanged looks. One slipped on latex gloves and held the glass to the light. The foreign particles were undeniable. Claire backed away, her voice shrill. It wasn't me. I just went along because I was scared, but the police had heard it all before. Within moments, both Michael and Claire were in handcuffs. David exhaled, the weight of the evening finally pressing down on him. The betrayal had been exposed. Justice had arrived, not with his anger, but with the truth, as the officers led his son and daughter-in-law away. David felt Linda's presence beside him, her voice whispering through memory. Family means honesty, even when it hurts. And tonight, honesty had saved his life. The Montclair police station buzzed with late-night activity phones ringing. Officers typing reports, the shuffle of paperwork under fluorescent lights. Yet for David Thompson, the world had narrowed to a single pane of glass. On the other side, his son Michael sat in a holding cell, pacing like a caged animal. Every few steps he glanced at his father, his expression a storm of fury, fear, and desperate pleading. Claire sat in a separate cell, her silk dress now wrinkled, her makeup streaked from tears. Their elegance had crumbled under the harsh light of reality. David sat at a table across from Detective Harrison, seasoned man with sharp eyes and a coffee cup that never seemed to cool. Mr. Thompson, Harrison said, voice steady, walk me through the Zetralin again. How did you know? David folded his hands, his voice low but clear. An anonymous tip. Someone in that house knew what they were planning and had the courage to warn me. Without them, I wouldn't be sitting here. The detective leaned back, nodding slowly. We found the documents in Michael's office, power of attorney, business transfers, everything ready for your signature. If you'd gone through with it, you'd have lost everything. Through the glass, Michael slammed his fist against the wall, shouting, Dad, please, you don't understand. I was desperate. I'll pay it back. I'll change. Don't let them do this. David closed his eyes for a moment. He had heard those words before different excuses for different failures, but always the same plea. Trust me one more time. Tonight he finally understood that trust without accountability was nothing more than enabling destruction. Claire's sobs echoed from her side of the station. Jonathan, tell them I was coerced. I didn't want any part of this. Her voice was shrill, desperate. But David knew better. He had seen the way she refilled his glass, the way she guided conversations toward his assets. She hadn't been a bystander, she had been an accomplice. Detective Harrison spoke again. Attempted poisoning alone carries 8 to 12 years. Add fraud and elder abuse. Your son is looking at 15 to 20. David's chest tightened. 15 to 20 years. It meant Michael would spend his 40s behind bars. It's not because life had been cruel, but because greed had driven him there. He thought of Linda again. She had always believed Michael would grow into a good man. She had hoped he would carry on the family's legacy with honesty and pride. Instead, her son had tried to dismantle everything she helped build. For a long moment, David sat silently, staring at the reflection of his own. weary face in the glass? A father who had lost his son not to death, but to betrayal. Finally he spoke, his voice steady, though heavy with sorrow. He had choices. He chose gambling over responsibility, lies over honesty, greed over family. And tonight, he chose to poison his own father. The detective didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth was already clear. As the paperwork was completed and the formal statements recorded, David stood in the lobby of the police station. The weight of the night pressed on his shoulders, but he also felt something else. Clarity. The betrayal had broken his heart, but it had also lifted the veil from his eyes. He stepped outside into the cool night air. For the first time in months, he felt Linda's presence not as grief, but as strength. Always told him that. Family wasn't about blood. It was about trust, loyalty, and love. And tonight, it wasn't his son who had shown him that. It was Maria, the housekeeper who risked everything to do the right thing in life. Betrayal often cuts deepest when it comes from those we love most. But sometimes, the people who truly stand by us aren't bound by blood, they're bound by loyalty, courage, and integrity. David lost a son that night, but he gained a reminder of what really matters: honesty, kindness, and the strength to protect what you've built, even when it means facing painful truths. What do you think? You ever discovered that family can sometimes mean the people who choose to protect you, not just the ones you share a name with? Share your thoughts in the comment side. Love to hear your stories, and if this lesson touched your heart. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next powerful story of resilience, justice, and truth.